Delighted to say, Claire Fox is back. Haven't seen you for a while. Welcome.
It's great to be here.
How are you
Thank
doing?
I'm fine. I mean, we have got this big festival, so I'm slightly
Nervous?
nervous and anxious and all
Yes.
that. But just to say, I just did the usual party conference bit,
Oh, yes.
speaking at fringe meetings and so on.
Uh-huh.
And so you could say, well, there's been a lot of political talking at those conferences. But I think that what we're trying to do with the Battle of Ideas Festival is a bit like talk radio, which is we've got a different approach to political discussion. We do have 270 plus speakers, but half the time of every single one of the 75 panel discussions, half the time is given over to the audience.
Right.
And so the idea is
So it's
that
a
you have some
participation
public
thing.
conversation.
Yeah.
We need to talk, don't we?
We do.
We don't need to be lectured to.
Right.
The speakers will be there to facilitate and, do quick, short provocations, but so that the audience can get their
Yes.
say.
Because, I find it amazing that we have so many people in this country who don't want you to speak, who don't want to hear what you've got to say, who don't want your ideas to be out there. Because, as far as I know, nothing bad has ever come of speaking to one another about stuff.
Well, you're absolutely right when you said in the introduction that you can't turn around but for there being a free speech issue.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if you saw, but YouTube have announced that they are now going to remove misinformation, as they say it, about climate change.
Oh,
And of
yeah.
course, that started with COVID
Yes.
misinformation.
Right.
And when they
And it's
say
an interesting word,
misinformation,
that, isn't
it's a very interesting word. And the government, and I'll be rowing about this in the House of Lords, the government are bringing in this online safety bill, and it's really quite frightening because it does give huge power to big tech to decide which information we as citizens get to listen to. Now, I think that we're all smart enough to be able to hear all sorts of information and work out what we consider to be misinforming us. What we don't need is some truth ministry deciding before we ever get to hear what they've decided is true or not.
Yes.
That's a frightening thought.
And that is a frightening thought, because when you ask who is actually making those decisions, you can't find out. At least if somebody in Parliament is passing a bill, you know who's behind it, you know who you can talk to about it. But at YouTube or at Facebook or even on Twitter, there is faceless kind of technocrats who sit in judgment on everybody else.
Absolutely, and I really would urge listeners to keep your eye out for that online safety bill, because they're presenting it as like, oh, it'll keep you safe online. And obviously we all have to put up with the endless trolls and all the rest of it. And it all sounds very appealing and it's all about protecting children. And we understand that. But if you actually look at the detail of the bill, it's much more frightening. But just on the everyday thing, I think that we've all been aware of the fact that free speech has, the attacks on free speech has been ratcheted up into cancel culture. And cancel culture really is quite a phenomenon, because it actually is where you denounce somebody, you smear them, you call them all sorts of names, and then you call for them to be sacked.
Yes.
And we had an example of this only yesterday, which was at Sussex University. The place yesterday morning was plastered with posters attacking somebody called Kathleen Stock.
Okay.
Not a household name. She's a philosophy professor, but these posters actually said Kathleen Stock makes trans students unsafe. So that makes it sound like she's the threat. Well, actually, all these posters said sack Kathleen Stock and no debate should be allowed. That's what they basically said. And, here is a philosophy professor who's got a great book out called Material Girls, which you should read. She's not threatening anyone. The real people who are doing the threatening are these bullies who are trying to cancel
The ones who are trying
her.
to stop her from talking.
That is like a kind of McCarthyism, trying to get people sacked. And we saw that with somebody who I know has been on the show and will be on again, Nick Buckley, where they actually succeeded.
Yes.
But it's not even the people who get cancelled. It's a lesson to everyone. So the problem for Kathleen Stock at Sussex University is that anyone who wants to support her then is a bit like, well, I don't want my name plastered all over the. I don't want to be called a bigot on campus. So it silences everyone else,
and
right?
a lot of people as well who can't be sure that they won't be affected by it, and who can't possibly maybe afford to get sacked.
Of course.
Genuinely worry about it.
No, and I don't blame them. And I'm not even saying, everyone should stand up, because saying have courage, comrades, as it were, is not fair if you're in a job that's a bit insecure.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, as a chilling impact. Kathleen Stock is one of the speakers on the Battle of Ideas on a debate on heresy. But I think that your point about every single issue we face at the moment, whether it's HGV drivers, whether it's the economy, whether we should adopt the new normal, even debates on arts and classical music, all
Right.
of these things are now subject to people
Oh, yeah.
saying you can't say that.
Now we're getting people talking not just about statues, but about paintings
No.
that were painted in a time when perhaps, the slave owners were driving, what people thought, and therefore this painting depicts something which is somehow evil, so we shouldn't have it up in a gallery.
Yeah, and what you get is something like classical music, which is, from the tradition of beauty and complex ideas associated with music, is now apparently associated with slavery, colonialism. Beethoven's out.
Yes.
And then, of course, if then a classical music professor says, as one of them did recently, actually I defend Beethoven, then the call is, well, you're an apologist for white supremacy, and you need to be cancelled.
I know.
So it goes on.
I don't know where it came from, really. Do you?
Well, I think that to a certain extent, because we were complacent about the importance of free speech, I think we probably all assumed it was a foundational value. It's identity politics in particular has kind of given the green light to different identity groups to use this as a power weapon.
Yes.
I mean, there's a new clerisy of power brokers who can shout, cancel them, and that gives them an enormous clout. By the way, this is happening not just on student campuses, in case you think it's just those kind of snowflakey. This is throughout corporate land. I mean, corporate culture is now basically saying what you can and can't say.
Yeah.
And big corporations are telling their staff that they need to sign up for, everything from critical race theory to all sorts of peculiar ideas in relation to identity and so on.
Yeah.
You've covered it here about the kind of rainbows everywhere. You've just said about the police. I mean, the police force are full of it, right?
Right.
It's like you think, what are you doing? Do your job. Why are you telling us what your value? We don't care, right? Do the job. But anyway, so the festival, and I'll hold it up now, is the Battle of Ideas.
Put it into that camera there, and you'll
into that camera. But really, honestly, we need to talk. I mean, goodness knows there's plenty of very difficult things facing us.
Yes.
The state of the health service, what we're going to do about energy crisis. Has Brexit worked out or not? I mean, is it a disaster, as some people are saying? These are open discussions.
I think the jury's out on that because we haven't really got to the end of it yet, have we?
All I'm saying is that's the kind of argument you need to have, and you need to hear all sides. We've got loads of people speaking who are environmentalists. I won't agree with them, but that's good,
the
right?
The other thing that's a problem, I think, now is that everybody's so sure of everything. And it's like, you can't be. There are lots of things that you're not sure about and you shouldn't be sure about because you don't know. Right.
You're so right. And we always say that if you walk out of one of the sessions at the festival and say, I'm more confused than when I walked in, we've done a good job.
That's right.
Because you've realised that, it's not quite as black and white or simplistic as I thought it was. And, sometimes we all do it a bit like, woke versus anti-woke. I'm on this side, I'm on that side. Having principles is fine.
Yeah.
But what you do need to do is be open-minded. Things change.
Yeah.
You have to be able to adapt to the new world. I mean, we couldn't have imagined that COVID would be upon us, that we'd have to consider what our attitude was
imagine
to
the situation.
Epidemiology a year ago.
If I'd said to you 2 years ago, in order for you to get a job, and I'm not sure this is happening much here, but it's certainly now happening in America quite a bit, you're going to have 2 jabs. Otherwise, we're not even going to recruit you, not even going to think about interviewing you, not even going to consider hiring you, no matter how good you are at whatever it is.
And I can't imagine, and we didn't have to consider that. And that's a real moral dilemma.
Yeah.
The issue about care workers being mandated to have vaccination, I've been on the programme and said I'm on the wrong, I completely disagree with that. But I do understand that there are people who've got relatives in care homes who worry about non-vaccinated care workers.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is, these are genuine moral dilemmas. If you don't have free speech, you can't discuss it, can you?
If you just get told, well, you're obviously an idiot, you're obviously stupid, you're obviously some kind of COVID denier, therefore you can just go and get in the bin while we get on with our, much cleverer policy.
Exactly. It polarises people. It means that you don't go into the subtleties. When we started this festival 16 years ago, can you believe that? Our slogan was free speech allowed. Well, we didn't think that was very radical. I mean, as the years have gone on, it's become almost revolutionary.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, just to say to people, come along. And also, the other thing I thought you'd like from Talk Radio, when we started this and over the years, quite a lot of people, when we ask them to speak, they say things like, you mean it's a public festival? Like anyone can come. Yeah. And they say, isn't that dangerous? And you can tell that what a lot of people who are on the professional circuit, talking circuit thinkers, oh, and if you let the public in, won't they all be kind of like knuckle draggers or inarticulate, or won't it get very leery? And the reality is that that's just an insulting view of one's fellow citizens. One of the fantastic things is, from young to old, even with different opinions, we are more than capable of having arguments and discussions and debates without it turning into fisticuffs.
Yes.
You can actually have intelligent argument. That's something which people tell us won't happen.
Right.
And I also think that this idea that, you know, people are, I'm afraid, a little bit into echo chambers.
Yes.
They don't kind of want to hear, like you said, they think, I'm right, don't tell me what else to think. Well, actually, the only way that you can even be sure that you're right is to hear the opposition point of view.
Well, I'll sometimes get messages from people on social media saying, why have you let so-and-so get a show? Or why is this woman on? Why is that bloke on? You shouldn't be putting these views out. Like, well, they're not my views, they're somebody else's views.
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, if you don't like those views, then have an argument with him.
Yeah,
Don't
exactly.
take it out and say, I only want to hear one view.
I mean, the thing is that it's tempting, and to be honest, if you're on the side of free speech, and sometimes you and I will be on the same side on things that are controversial, or criticism of lockdown or whatever, you know, sometimes critical of the environmentalist orthodoxies and dogmas, those kind of things. You can sort of, and you're smeared by these people on the other side who say you're deniers of one sort or another. It can be very tempting to think, well, I'm not going to engage in them then. I'm going to create my own safe space.
Right.
But actually, that doesn't do any of us any good. And I think it's particularly important for young people to realise that we're brave enough to take on the opposition, and that they need to be able to hear all sides, don't they?
And I think the trouble is as well that a lot of those who would like to shut you down have actually now got quite well organised about it, and they have techniques to do it. And they don't just, it's not just a random kind of, you know, let's have a go at her on Twitter, or let's have a go at his employer. You know, they actually, I think, have tactical ability to kind of do one thing, then another thing, and then the next thing, and you know, and it is quite terrifyingly sort of an imposition on what you can do.
I know. One of the things that I'm very worried about is that we cannot think out loud and make mistakes. Now, we all have to experiment a bit. I mean, I try and encourage people when we organise these festivals or any kind of public debate to say, look, you know, you might not be right and you might not be sure, but you're allowed to say something which then you say, and this might sound idiotic, but what do you think?
Right.
But actually, increasingly, you get into trouble for that. I was sort of talking to some people who work in the corporate sector, and they've got these things called race ambassadors who are recruited and trained to go around workplaces to encourage healthy conversations about race.
Healthy?
What does that mean even? And then they're given a checklist.
Ones?
Yeah, exactly. Well, then they're given this checklist of like things to look out for. And if, for example, you say, well, I'd rather not discuss that, that's seen to be a bit dodgy, because we now know that silence is violence. So it's kind of got so frightening to me that they're basically mandating us to follow a script. You're not allowed to even say, can I just listen? Can I just think? In other words, you've got to say the right thing all the time. Now, that is really stifling in workplaces.
Well,
it's terrible. And as you say, it's well organised. That's what I'm trying to say. Is they have decided, well, we're not just going to let you we're not just going to try and cancel if you say the wrong thing. We're going to think you're dodgy if you don't say exactly what we tell you to say now.
And if we see you carrying a book that you shouldn't really be reading, I mean, and then you're starting to get into really weird places.
I know. Well, I mean, and you have had instances where people like Amazon have actually started saying we're not going to sell this socially conservative
Laura Dodsworth
book.
for a long time, and I think it's not happening anymore, but for a long time when she was coming in here, she would go, you know, my book's disappeared again. And you can't find it. Or they'll they do this with YouTube videos as well, that, you know, suddenly you can't find the interview that you know you did that was there yesterday, but somehow it's disappeared.
Absolutely.
And it's still there somewhere, but you can't find it.
Well, we know that the big tech companies are very well organised at, deboosting, as they say.
Yes.
You know, I mean, that happens all the time. It's kind of quite subtle, so you don't really know if you're being censored. But I think you're right, you know, when people actually say, don't read this book, or when big tech stop you buying it or make things harder. I mean, we all know that book burning is bad. You know, we associate that with fascism and Nazi Germany. But there's a form of book burning if you basically tell people or demonize a book in such a way that if you've seen reading it, that is a contemporary tech version. So I just think all the time, you know, ideas, I mean, people will say, oh, you know, you just organise talking shops, right? Well, let me tell you something. You do need to talk, which is why we have talk radio. And you need to actually have ideas there has to be something substantive. We can't just sound off all the time, right?
And also, I think you have to make sure you don't become a parody of yourself, where you're always just banging on about wokery and today's attack on the woke is blah, because then you lose all the credibility that you should have.
Exactly,
for picking up the right ones.
And I'm a Brexiteer, but I'm absolutely happy to say, let's talk about what's caused the skills shortage, right?
Yeah.
We've got to say maybe Brexit was before everybody listens. It's not what I think. What I'm saying is that I don't want to be in a situation all the time where you say, I voted Leave and I refuse to discuss any of the potentially negative consequences. Let's discuss it with some subtlety. There's a bit of layering here, right?
Yeah.
I could talk for hours on it.
The fact that we've left the European Union actually might have something to do with it.
Yeah. We were never going to leave the European Union and nothing happened.
Right.
The idea is that something happens. I mean, I do think on that in 2016, the establishment could have said, oh, well, one of the consequences of leaving the European Union might be that there's a freedom of movement question and there might be a skills shortage. Let's tackle it. But of course, we know that the majority of the establishment said, we're not really going to leave the EU at all. They might have voted for that, but it's not going to happen.
No.
So they didn't do anything, right?
But also,
these things are interesting to discuss in detail.
I also think a lot of people didn't know, actually, that the reason for all of the people coming into this country to work was because they were working for lower wages. Yeah. And actually, it's a good thing if we're going to get better wages in this country as a result.
Absolutely. But I'm simply making the point, just to use it as an illustration, that it's perfectly reasonable, and I think that people who voted Leave should do this, is to have these conversations and to be open and honest about things, and to say, well, there are challenges, right? There are things that we now have to tackle. Yes. There are positive opportunities, but they're not straightforward. Anyway, I'm using it as an illustration.
Things, right? And then people go, that's so stupid. I say, well, look, how is it that we haven't got enough people to kill all the pigs and butcher them, so we're going to kill all the pigs? And you go... And I know it's not quite as straightforward as that, but it sounds daft, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, any one of these different economic challenges, these work challenges, the whole question of how we're going to really kickstart the economic growth that will lead to proper levelling up rather than just a slogan, that was put on hold by COVID, right? Yeah. And the reality is that COVID's and the response to COVID, which was to lock down and close down society, we have got some very big issues that this country needs to take on now. And all I'm saying is there's no way that you can do that by leaving it up to a technocratic crowd at Westminster. This needs the full creative energy of every single citizen in this country discussing, debating what's the best way to... You want to know how to solve certain problems? Talk to the majority of people who work in that area. You want to know how to solve the social care crisis? Don't necessarily just set up a commission. Go out and talk to the carers. Go out and talk to the people who work in care homes. Let's actually get their views and get some... Now, if you're in a situation where they say, we don't say that, that's the wrong thing to say. Shut up, don't say that, that's offensive or whatever, we're never going to get anywhere. So we need every view to be heard and discussed, and that's why free speech is allowed, that's why the Battle of Ideas Festival matters, and it's why Talk Radio matters. Brilliant.
And so how can people get in? Do they need a ticket, or is it...
Well, you need to get your tickets. There's loads of reductions, by the way. Okay. And you can go on the website and see all the details of it, battleofideas.org.uk. Really, genuinely pop along, right? It's Church House, heart of Westminster. We're calling it the People's Takeover of Westminster. Brilliant. A little bit different than being in the Lords. It's much more exciting than being in the Lords, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there.
Unfortunately, you don't get paid to attend, but there we are.
And by the way, a lot of people are saying, "No, I'm from the North, I'm not coming." Some people are, but we've also got a version in the North. We were in Buxton on the 30th of October as well, so no excuses.
Brilliant.
Get there.
Well, Claire, great to see you. Thank you very much for coming in. Baroness